ask, based on advice from the legislative clerks, that we postpone the study of Clause 2 until the end. This will allow us to first consider and then make a decision on amendments that could have an impact on the definitions. As a reminder, the definitions clause of a bill is not the place to propose a substantive amendment to a bill unless other amendments have been adopted that would warrant amendments to the definition clause. And for clarity, as an example, there is an amendment, CPC 2, that proposes to add a definition for Indigenous governing body, but as of right now, the words Indigenous governing body do not appear in the bill. So by postponing Clause 2, we can determine whether or not to put those words in the bill. That would dictate whether or not it is appropriate to assign a definition in the legislation. So I'm asking for your consensus to postpone Clause 2 until the end. Is that the will of the meeting? Okay. I think, how about over on the Liberal side? I haven't heard anyone over there. Okay. I see consensus. Thank you, colleagues. That will make things move more smoothly. So then, that then takes us to Clause 3, right here. Okay, so the chair calls Clause 3, and the first amendment for Clause 3 is CPC 7. CPC 7 is on page 7 of the package, and it stands in the name of Dr. Ellis. Dr. Ellis, would you like to move CPC 7?
Sure. Thanks, Chair. So I move that Bill C-64 in Clause 3 be amended by replacing lines 1 to 3 on page 3 with the following. 3, the purpose of this act is to create a funding framework for certain prescription drugs and related products intended for contraception or the treatment of diabetes, and to support. Continue on from there.
Thank you. Is there any debate? Dr. Ellis.
So, I think the big thing that we're looking for here is it's very clear in the original title of this bill that this is not universal pharmacare. And certainly Canadians need to know that is what this particular bill is. And the two medications that it does propose to cover are simply contraception and treatment of diabetes and potentially associated devices. And even that is a bit of a stretch given the fact that I think we learned during testimony that the lists put out on Canada.ca are really, I apologize for saying it as such, but not built on reality, but only in the sense that they can be modified, added to, subtracted, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think the big thing with respect to those two lists, from my perspective, is I'm very uncertain as to why they were even put out in the first place, because no one ever said they were examples or anything like that. They alluded to the fact that perhaps they are the formulary to come. And we also heard several glaring examples that were missing from those lists, including perhaps the most successful medication to treat diabetes ever, known as Ozempic or semaglutide. So given that, I think that the clarity is needed on behalf of Canadians to say, as I mentioned, this is certain prescription drugs, certainly not all. And who knows what potentially may or may not come in the future. So I shall leave it at that.
Mr. Doherty?
Yeah. It's hard for me to chime in after I've missed a majority of the debate and discussion on this, but let's call it for what it is. It's being billed as pharmacare, but it really is not pharmacare. Pharmacare implies that a national pharmacare program implies that any drug that Canadians are looking for, they shall be able to receive. Further to what Dr. Ellis has said is that this piece of legislation really just deals with two main areas of concern, and that is contraception as well as diabetes. Two very important topics and issues that Canadians face and are dealing with. And I think if you've read the amendments that, the common sense amendments that have been put forth by our Conservative colleagues, is that let's call it for what it is. And let's not mislead Canadians. You know, I think it's important that us here at this committee, I've said this all along, we do some of our best work in Parliament at the committee, at committees, but it calls for common sense for all of us. The work that we do here will be reported to the House, and at that point then, Canadians will know that they, what this Bill C-64 entails. I don't think that there's any requirement for us to build this as anything other than, again, what it does. And it funds certain, it's a funding framework for certain prescription drugs and related products intended for contraception, for the treatment of diabetes, and to support. And I think that there, and it's not just this bill, but others, we struggle in this House at times to for common sense to come into play, and I think this is just a common sense amendment that our colleague, Doc Ellis, has put forth, and I support CPC 7.
Thank you, Mr. Doherty. Mr. Julian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I did want to thank you again for giving us plenty of notice. It was 2 weeks ago that you wrote to us letting us know about amendments and the timetable required, so that gave us adequate time to prepare amendments. This particular amendment I would not support. What it does is actually limit the scope, the purpose and principles of the pharmacare bill. And we've heard from the majority of witnesses, we're very clear about this being important legislation that will make a difference in people's lives. And they want to see the bill adopted, not changed, and in this case, limiting the scope of pharmacare. They want to see it move forward. And I think particularly the compelling testimony from people with diabetes that are paying $1,000, sometimes $1,500 a month for diabetes medication that is a struggle for them each and every day. They have to put food on the table, they have to keep a roof over their head, and at the same time they have to pay for medication. And as you know, Mr. Chair, every other country that has universal health care, and the NDP, of course, under Tommy Douglas, fought hard in a minority parliament to get universal health care. Every single country that has universal health care has universal pharmacare. So to limit the scope or the purpose of the Act, to my mind, does a disservice not only to all those who are going to benefit from pharmacare in its first stage, which is diabetes medication and contraception, but to all of those who are looking to see the next stage of pharmacare. And I particularly flag constituents in my riding that are paying $1,000 a month for heart medication. If they don't take that heart medication, very similar to diabetes medication, they die. And they are forced, their families are forced to come up with $1,000 each and every month. Any member of Parliament who believes in fighting against affordability issues, and of course, we saw under the previous government, the Conservative government, we saw housing prices double, we saw food bank lineups double. Tragically, we've seen the same thing under the current government. So I think members of Parliament are all aware of the affordability issues that have happened with the last 17 years of doubling and then doubling again of housing prices, doubling and then doubling again of food bank lineups. We need to start providing this relief. The NDP's dental care program has helped 100,000 seniors already have access to dental care, and this pharmacare bill, once it's passed and the agreements are negotiated by the Minister of Health, will help 6 million Canadians with diabetes, 9 million Canadians who look for contraception. So I think if we're concerned about affordability, we should all be voting for the bill, but not limiting its purpose, and that's why I'm voting no on this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Julian. Mr. Nakvi, please.
Thank you, Chair. I suggest members also vote against this suggested amendment. This is a framework legislation in developing a farmer care system in Canada. Clause 3 is important in terms of outlining the purpose under which this framework legislation is developed. Of course, we are talking about the first phase of that framework around farmer care, and making the kind of amendments that is being proposed limits the scope and the purpose of the legislation as a framework piece of legislation. So in that spirit, our recommendation is that we vote against these amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Doherty, please.
I think it's interesting that our colleague from Mr. Julian takes the opportunity to slag the previous government when indeed he's supported this the Liberal government for the last 9 years, and we've seen the affordability crisis like we've never seen in generations. We've got more Canadians visiting food banks under this government and under this coalition than ever before. We see more homeless encampments under this coalition than ever before. And so it's a little rich for our colleague down the way, whom I respect, to stand there and use this as an opportunity to slag a government that and slag any intentions that we put forth. This is not a farmer care bill. And there's no illusions of this. And why are we lying to, and I won't say we, why are they lying to Canadians? They're misleading Canadians, giving false hope that this is a pharmacare bill. If the heart medications that our colleague brings up of his constituent, if that was truly important to them, why is that not included in this version of this bill? Why? It is simply a campaign brochure that they can, both parties, the coalition can stand up and say, this is what we've done for you. 100% wedge issues, trying to paint Conservatives and whoever else into a corner and twist themselves up. The simple fact is that they're misleading Canadians on this. The writing's on the wall. We know what's going to happen. It'll be the Conservatives that are standing up for the truth and trying to make sure, look, if this bill's going to pass, why don't we just call it what it is? Why not be clear with Canadians? It's bizarre for me that we sit here and we, you want to, stand up and wave the flag and say that you've trumpeted and you've got pharmacare through, or a dental, a national dental program. It's not a dental program. Most dentists will not prescribe to that dental program because there's not enough information. They have no idea as to how it's going to work. It's great that our colleague down the way says that he's got 100,000 seniors that he knows of, or that they know of in the first 22 days of this. That's amazing. But the people that I talk to will not sign up for it. The dentists that I talk to will not sign up for it because there's not enough information. So there isn't a national dental care program, just the same as there will not be a national pharmacare program, because the work has not been done in advance to make sure that that Canadians from coast to coast that either have plans currently will be made whole, or what the Canadians that do not have a plan right now, what will they be getting? It's very frustrating when we sit here and we listen to the rhetoric that comes out of some of our colleagues, and they take every opportunity when we're just simply having a normal conversation, and they simply take every opportunity to slag, a party that has been in hasn't been in power for 10 years yet. They've been in a coalition for at least 9 years now, and they have backed this government every step of the way through every scandal that this government has gone through. They have sided with them. It's deeply disappointing that the NDP has fallen so far, and continue to back a government that is corrupt and on their way out.
Dr. Ellis?
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks to my colleague. It's interesting. I had been hopeful, and I think after my colleague, Mr. Doherty, and I started off this round with a couple of short rationale for accepting the amendment that we had proposed, and realistically, without much in the way of partisan rhetoric, simply to point out that this bill does not talk about other medications, and I guess I would be aghast, but probably not now. I should be aghast that a 4-page bill, if you take out the preamble, is what this NDP Liberal coalition thinks a pharmacare bill should look like. After 10 hours of witness testimony, and the other part of that interesting witness testimony is having Dr. Morgan and Dr. Gagnon here, and everybody heard their testimony. Now, as interesting as it may be, the two of them, thankfully, were not in the same room. One was virtual, one was here, but they were both billed as Canada's leading experts on pharmacare. And we know that neither one of them had any input into this bill, none, zero. And two Canadian experts on pharmacare who touted the incredible benefits of pharmacare, of what it could be and what it should be, et cetera, when what we hear is that they had zero input. Now, people around the table may think, okay, well, that's normal. This is not how a government works. It wouldn't reach out to Canada's leading experts on pharmacare. No, what would it do? Well, I quite frankly, I have no idea what they did. I would suspect that somehow in-house they dreamt up this pharmacare pamphlet of 4 pages, which sadly, people are going into pharmacies now and asking for their free medications. And we know that this bill does not exist. We also know that there is no possibility anywhere in the near future that this is going to come into being, in the sense that there is an incredible bureaucratic framework that now exists to continue the creation of the Canada Drug Agency and the phase out of the CADTH, and then the creation of this heretofore, here as yet unknown council of experts, or whatever the bureaucratic name is, where they're coming from, who they are. Maybe 2 of Canada's leading experts in pharmacare will be on that council of experts. But again, that council of experts is not to make this bill better. It is to actually then decide which diabetes and contraceptive medications will be on a formulary, which doesn't exist, even though, as I mentioned previously, 2 lists came out that say these are the medications which will likely be within the scope of the pharmacare pamphlet. And that is not transparency. It is not sunny ways. It is not allowing Canadians in any way, shape, or form to begin to have an understanding of what Bill C-64 is. They may have aspirational goals, which is fine. Everybody should have goals for themselves they set and reevaluate. But to pretend that this is anything but an idea, you know, as one of my colleagues once says, this is out there telling Canadians that you have built a house for them, that you're going to give to them for free, when realistically you have even yet to consult with the architect. Here it is, we've built your house, but we really have no plan. And now we're going to have arguments from the NDP Liberal Coalition suggesting that this is a fully completed house and that this will be a comprehensive plan when it's all done, when sadly, on behalf of Canadians, we would implore the acceptance of the amendment because we know what the truth is. No transparency and no sunny ways here. You know, the other difficulty, of course, is our NDP colleague talking about the last 17 years now. Yeah. Well, it's fascinating that the ghost of Stephen Harper lives deep in the heads of the NDP Liberal Coalition, rent-free forever. You know, I wish I would have had a nickel for every time I heard them mention Mr. Harper's name, in a disparaging way, of course. Even though, you know, when the Harper government left, we know that the average rents since that time have doubled, the average mortgage payments have doubled, the cost, the inflationary cost of interest rates has literally put, if there were such a thing, literally put Canadians in the poorhouse. It's fascinating to me that again, our NDP, part of the NDP Liberal Costly Coalition, wants to go on and talk about how difficult things have been for the last 17 years. Canadians know that now more than ever, there's no chance for the NDP ever to form any government in this country. Sadly, the late Jack Layton probably took them as close to the promised land as they're ever going to get. And certainly with the way things are going and the promises they're making and the difficult coalition and the hole that they've dug for themselves, I would suggest that they're going to be like Moses. They're going to see the promised land, but they're never ever going to get there. So, you know, when we talk about the cost of things and how difficult it is for Canadians, again, this government really is quite fascinating in the sense that they have this strange idea that after they've created a problem for Canadians, now they want to build themselves as the savior to come in and free Canadians from the bondage that they have created. And we know that their fiscal irresponsibility is one part of that. And when you look at their fiscal irresponsibility, you know, I guess I would challenge Canadians out there today. Let's think about the money that they spent on vaccine factories in this country. You know, first we have the vaccine partnership with Mitsubishi Tanabe Group. And Mitsubishi Tanabe Group came here with a plant-based vaccine, which the World Health Organization, because it was based on the nicotine plant, the World Health Organization said, you know what, it's going to be very difficult for us to use this, and also because Philip Morris International, a major tobacco player, was involved with the development and the ownership of that company, that the World Health Organization chose to say, you know what, there's no way, shape, or form that this vaccine could potentially be used on the world market because of the association with Philip Morris International. So what happened after that? Well, in this fiscal irresponsibility, as I'm pointing out, is that then Philip Morris got out of the whole Medicago Mitsubishi Tanabe partnership, and the Canadian government continued while working on, strangely enough, in the face, and I'll come back to this because I think it's germane and important, in the face of the National Microbiology Lab scandal, where 2 scientists were released
Point of order.
from the National Microbiology.
Mr. Julian, on a point of order?
Yeah, I question relevance. As you know, Mr. Chair, within committee, there are 2 sacred rules when you're trying to block legislation in a filibuster, and the 2 sacred rules are you can't be repetitive and you have to be relevant. And the comments, Mr. Ellis, are straying now into irrelevance.
I agree with you, Mr. Julian, and I trust that Dr. Ellis will bring it back to CPC number 7. Dr. Ellis.
Absolutely, Chair, and if the member were paying rapt attention, as he should be, because he fails to understand the facts, I did mention that this is a dissertation which is about fiscal irresponsibility, and the irresponsibility and the disinformation peddled by this government. So I shall continue. So if the member wishes to pay close attention, then it won't be necessary to interrupt. So that being said, when we began to look at this government's, this NDP Liberal costly coalition government's idea of fiscal responsibility, it's related to the fact that even during the time when we knew that 2 scientists had been dismissed
Point of order.
from the National
Mr. Julian, on a
Microbiology
point of
Lab.
order?
Mr. Chair, this is irrelevant to the discussion of CPC 7. So again, there's an issue of relevance here that Dr. Ellis needs to be attentive to, and I would ask you to bring him to order, please.
Dr. Ellis, the connection that you're trying to make between CPC 7 and the labs is tenuous at best, so I'd ask you to come back to it, please.
That's not a problem, Chair. So as I was saying, the 2 Chinese-Canadian scientists dismissed from the National Microbiology Lab in the face of the Canadian NDP Liberal costly coalition government creating a partnership with Mitsubishi Tanabe and Philip Morris.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. You've directed Dr. Ellis. He's now floating the rules in quite a disturbing way.
Actually, I'm not sure that you gave him enough time to make the connection to be able to say that. So it does appear that you're correct, but I think that we need to hear a little more to have him define the connection.
Yes,
Go ahead, Dr.
Thank you, Chair. Patience is a virtue, and perhaps my colleague with the NDP Liberal Costly Coalition is anxious to get his vote-buying bill passed. But that being said, I think it's important that Canadians understand that the frivolous spending nature of this government is directly related to what we're talking, and germane with respect to what we're talking about today, in the sense that we know, and perhaps this is why the member doesn't want me to talk about it, but we know almost $500 million, $500 million, was wasted with the collapse of the Medicago factory manufacturing facility. And what happened? Well, we know that that money then disappeared. And we also know that there are some difficulties with respect to the intellectual property related to the plant-based vaccine, which was deemed to be irrelevant by the World Health Organization. And Chair, continuing on with that same vein, what do we see this morning but another news study related to another $130 million wasted by this government on another vaccine factory called Novavax, which has once again not produced any vaccines and has had 2 phase 3 clinical trials which have failed for respiratory syncytial virus. Now, that doesn't mean that any of that work is not important, but what it does mean is the frivolous spending nature associated with this NDP Liberal costly coalition and the lack of transparency on behalf of Canadians to allow them to begin to understand where the billions of dollars are being
Point of order,
spent.
Mr. Chair. I gave Dr. Ellis a minute and a half, as you did. The normal practice when somebody continues to break the rules that govern committees is that you pass to the next person on the list, on the speaking list. I know that this is a filibuster, but it's a particularly inelegant one because it's irrelevant. It's not related to CPC 7.
Mr. Julian, on this, I respectfully disagree. In the last minute and a half, it's pretty clear that the theme of Dr. Ellis's intervention is transparency and the responsible management of the fiscal purse, and he is citing examples other than the one that is contained in CPC 7 that supports what he's saying. So I know what he's saying is something that he and maybe others, but not everyone, would agree or disagree with. But I do see the link as tenuous as it is based on what he said in the last minute or so. So I don't accept that it's irrelevant, and I would ask Dr. Ellis to go on.
Well, thank you very much for your support, Chair, and I know that on behalf of the folks in Prince Edward Island, this is an important part of what they would like to understand with respect to the frivolous and non-transparent nature of this costly coalition. So picking up the thread of where we were was now at the Novavax story, and the Novavax story continues to be related to the frivolous spending of this costly coalition. And not surprisingly, and again, as I said, I want to make it clear because I know that someone will attempt to make this tenuous connection that I don't support this or I don't support that, which is what they always say. You know, even the Prime Minister is there in my riding on Friday suggesting that you know, that I don't support contraception when I would certainly suggest that the thousands and tens of thousands of prescriptions that I wrote for contraceptives would fly directly in the face of that, even though he had more MPs there from other Nova Scotia ridings than there were spectators. But that, Chair, I would suggest is a little off topic, and I'll come back to the frivolous spending. So I won't.
I disagree. You're talking about contraception.
Well, there you go.
But that's actually right in your amendment.
Well, thank you very much for
Yes.
that, Chair.
Yeah.
I guess I was simply related to the fact that that there were more MPs than spectators there, which perhaps is irrelevant, but not as irrelevant as the costly coalition. So back to where we were with respect to Novavax. So Novavax is an opportunity. It was an opportunity for Canadians, which again, it appears the costly coalition continues to just want to back the wrong horse, because now we have another non-mRNA based vaccine, which potentially could be useful around the world, but unable to actually produce any vaccine, and failed trials, as I said, with respect to RSV, or respiratory syncytial virus, 2 phase 3 clinical trials, which now for 100 employees at that factory, the Canadian government, I believe through the National Research Council, is paying out $17 million a year. And even inside the, and I think I have the reference here, actually. Actually, I do. Even inside the shockingly good, CBC article, what it says, if I can find it, meanwhile, the National Research Council is still bankrolling the facility with $17 million in annual funding to help keep about 100 employees working on site, adding to the figures provided by the NRC, the federal government's research and development arm. It goes on to say the firm, the BMC and the NRC, have repeatedly blown past supposed start dates and have told the media at various points that production would start in 2021, 2022, and 2023. They went on to quote the Professor Emeritus at University of Ottawa's School of Medicine, who's an expert in virology and microbiology, Dr. Earl Brown. Brown said that there is a, quote, niche market for Novavax subunit vaccine, which uses a different technology than mRNA products from Pfizer and Moderna. Novavax has been able to sell some of its protein-based vaccine to patients who want an alternative to mRNA. But Brown questions whether the mRNA skeptic market is big enough to sustain a large operation like the BMC over the longer term. There is a couple of relevant things in here. As of February, only 37,000 Novavax shots have been administered in Canada, those, of course, manufactured in the United States, compared to more than 70 million Pfizer doses and about 33 million Moderna shots, according to PHAC. Can they be viable in the COVID market? Will they sell enough product to keep themselves alive? I think it's questionable that they survive. There are two big vaccine winners, and Novavax isn't one of them. I'm very concerned when I hear about a vaccine facility that's not pumping out products. When they sit idle, that is a bad sign. You should be busy all the time. You should be active, current, having your staff putting out licensed product continuously, which is something that the NDP Liberal Costly Coalition really struggles in being able to understand, that being productive and having people getting good paying jobs and having a great purpose for their lives instead of receiving free things from the government, that is a good thing. Brown said he supported the construction of a publicly owned vaccine plant in the fog of 2020, but the longer it remains in limbo, the less viable it will be. He said the federal government may eventually get tired of pumping $17 million into a plant that's not producing anything or something that's not really in high demand. This article gets even better, and this will really crystallize, when I come to it, the hypocrisy and lack of transparency and, as a matter of fact, overt opaqueness of this NDP Liberal coalition. He added, there's amnesia with pandemics in the extreme, and Ottawa may simply move on from plans to prepare the country for the next health crisis. He went on and talked a bit about Connaught Labs in Toronto, which was privatized, et cetera, et cetera. It's interesting, you know, and this is the connection that I wanted to make before being interrupted many times by Mr. Julian. This says, after a failed partnership with a Chinese vaccine company, Ottawa picked Novavax to produce that company's COVID product at the Montreal site. In announcing the pivot to Novavax in February 2021, Trudeau, this is quoting from this article, said the publicly owned facility would produce tens of millions of shots by that summer. It was billed as a way to lessen Canada's dependence on foreign sources at a time of rapturous global competition for other products from Pfizer and Moderna. This is a major step forward to get vaccines made in Canada for Canadians, Trudeau said. This gets even better. Also, in February 2021, Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne compared building this sort of facility from the ground up on a constrained timeline to the U.S. effort to put an astronaut on the moon. You can imagine, like we've never made vaccines before. This is like the Apollo project. I'm sorry. Kills me. Champagne said, normally it would take 2 to 3 years to do this to get a production facility up and running. 3 years on, it appears it will take even longer than that.
Point of order, Chair.
Mr. Naqvi on a point of order.
Well, I think I'm just going to build on Mr. Julian's point. I think Mr. Ellis have just really gone so off the deep end and off track here that he's just humoring himself at this moment because there are no relevance whatsoever anymore, any semblance whatsoever to the CPC clause, CPC Amendment 7 that we are dealing with. So unless his intention is to amuse himself, which he can do so at his own time in private, which I'm sure he'll enjoy even more, perhaps so we can move to the next speaker. Thank you.
Please bring it back around, Dr. Ellis. Oh, another point of order, or you want to speak to the one that was just made?
I'm going to be talking about the same one that's just made. I believe that it is incumbent on each and every one of us to be very diligent and cautious in the words we use, and I believe that the words that were used by Mr. Naqvi in his point of order were deeply disrespectful and inappropriate, and I would caution him to be more selective in the words he uses in this committee.
Thank you. Dr. Ellis, it's one thing to create a link around the different practices of government and the fiscal responsibility of each one. The level of detail that you're going into is really tangential. Please bring it back.
Appreciate that, Chair. You know, I would suggest, though, that it's important that Canadians understand what transparency is and what it is not. And we know that very clearly from the mention in this article that this government really struggles with the concept of transparency. And that is also why it is incredibly important that we are very, very clear with respect to what this bill is and what it isn't. You know, again, just to underline this, to underscore it, talking about transparency, you know, we have the industry minister suggesting that, you know, creating a vaccine facility is like putting somebody on the moon. That's just incomprehensible to everyday Canadians. So what I would suggest, Chair, is that and we can come back to some of these points. There's no issue with me with continuing to belabor it. However, this bill is clearly related to prescription drugs and related products intended for contraception or the treatment of diabetes and to support, etc. And that is why it's incredibly important that we add that here. So there's clarity, there's transparency, and there's responsibility on behalf of Canadians. This is not a universal pharmacare bill in any way, shape, or form. This is a pharmacare pamphlet of 4 pages. And again, the final thing I will say, Chair, is that it would be shocking to me that the costly coalition around this table, not including the Conservative members, and I know the Bloc member certainly does not want to support this bill, considering the fact that Quebec has a pharmacare program already, but that they would allow Canadians to think that this particular pamphlet is a universal pharmacare bill, which as of yet has undefined medications, even related to contraception and to diabetes. So on behalf of Canadians, I would implore those around the table to vote for CPC 7 such that it is an important part for transparency and clarity on behalf of Canadians. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis. Mr. Julian, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did want to say the reason why I'm opposing CPC 7 is because the fact is it's not helpful in the pharmacare bill that will make a difference in the lives of 6 million people with diabetes and 9 million people in Canada who use contraception. It's not a helpful amendment at all. I did want to correct the record on a number of things, and I will do that very, very quickly. I understand the filibuster that Conservatives are blocking the bill, and they want to talk this out, and that's why the House of Commons, in its wisdom, directed us to sit until we get this done. And so I'm prepared to sit until we get these amendments done and we get the bill finished tonight. That's what the House of Commons decided. And the filibuster, the unnecessary verbiage, is not helpful to getting what most witnesses told us needs to happen, which is getting this bill passed. The vast majority of witnesses said that very fact. 2 things I would like to correct. First off, the Conservatives love to play fast and loose with language. And it's unfortunate because I'm fact-based. I ran a major social enterprise before I was elected to Parliament, and you have to be basing things on the facts. The first fact is that there is no coalition. What there is a confidence and supply agreement. Secondly, what the confidence and supply agreement has only been in existence for 2 years. It's brought us anti-SCAP legislation. It's brought us the pharmacare bill. It's brought us affordable housing.
Point of order, Chair.
Ellis?
You know what, I guess it's interesting, you know, the member really wants us to get to the heart of this bill. He's talking on incessantly about his coalition. So I'm not entirely sure what the relevance is.
Well, the relevance is addressing the points that you raised, which I ruled as being relevant. Go ahead, go ahead, Mr. Julian.
Thank you. And I understand Dr. Ellis is very concerned about all the good things that the NDP has brought to this Parliament because he's in a riding where there's a lot of NDP support. Now, that being said, I want to come back to dental care because the facts are very clear. 2 million Canadian seniors have signed up so far. 100,000 in the first 3 weeks of the program actually got dental care, in some cases for the first time ever in their lifetimes. And that means
Point of order,
this is
Chair.
a significant and appropriate success.
Point of order.
You know, again, if we're going to continue to go down this road, Chair, I guess I would wonder what the relevance of the non-existent dental care program. Is that the member's point, is to point out that this is another failed program? I'm not sure what the relevance of the failing dental care program is.
Mr. Julian, can you bring it back around to either the remarks made by Dr. Ellis or CPC 7? Thank you.
Well, those were the remarks of Dr. Ellis, and he was wrong, and I'm establishing the facts. 2 million Canadian seniors so far, tens of thousands signing up every week, 100,000 that received dental care in the first 3 weeks. These are all appropriate. And so in terms of pharmacare, the bill itself, it will make a difference, as dental care already has. I understand the Conservatives are very, very wary of that because all of a sudden, the next election will be much more likely to be where the Conservatives would cut rather than what they would love it to be on, which is this constant talk about price on pollution. So the CPC 7, simply not an appropriate amendment. What it does is it restricts access to the medication that Canadians need. What we need to do, and what this bill does, as we've heard from the vast majority of witnesses, provide supports to 6 million Canadians with diabetes that are paying, in some cases, $1,000 a month or $1,500 a month for the medication. 9 million Canadians that need contraception. The bill needs to be voted through. I would ask through you, Mr. Chair, for the Conservatives to stop their filibuster and allow us to actually vote on these amendments. And for CPC 7, I will be voting no.
Thank you, Mr. Julian. Mr. Doherty, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Where to start or where to continue? You know, what's frustrating for me is we do have Canadians that are out there that are struggling. There's no two ways about it. Absolutely. Whether it is dental care or whether it is affordable prescriptions and medications, I think we need to do better. The challenge that I have is that this government puts forth a piece of legislation that says that it's universal dental care, which it isn't. Now they're coming out with a piece of legislation that is they're billing as it's universal pharmacare, which it isn't. So Canadians are being lied to. This is a four-page document that has serious ramifications nationally. There's no definition for single payer or first dollar. So do we even know what this bill or pamphlet is? The minister could not answer simple questions such as how many Canadians are without doctors, could not answer the question as to what's going to happen with the 90% of, is it 90% of Canadians that do have a a benefit plan that for medications, and at least 85%. What's going to happen with those plans? Who's going to pay for those plans? I know that I met personally with the Canadian Life and Health Insurance Association. They raised serious questions, and they also raised the fact that nobody's talking to them. Nobody's talking to the insurers as to what they're going to do. What about organizations and companies that have chambers of commerce, that have plans for their memberships and for their employees? What are these companies and these groups to do? As far as I can tell, that none of this has been worked out. But I guess as it is with this government, it's just like the checks in the mail. Wait and see. We'll figure it out. Just get it to committee and you'll work on it, and amendments will be passed and we'll make it better. Well, it never happens. Another bit of troubling information was that the minister admitted that none of the provinces have asked for this. None of them. Was Quebec? Were they even, our Bloc colleague, was Quebec even consulted? We heard that from witnesses that, as I mentioned, that they expressed deep concern that Canadians would lose their current private plans. We have a lengthy and complicated drug approval process, which adds to the issues of the cost of our drugs and prescriptions in our country. Wouldn't it be better that our government and the coalition and all of us at this table working to find a way to make drugs more affordable to all Canadians, rather than a Band-Aid solution that looks at, and it's, again, you're calling it a national pharmacare program, and you're dealing with, it's really two medications, or two types of medications. We have a national what's being billed as a public pharmacare plan or a national pharmacare plan, and is it going to, they always talk about, well, wait and see what this is going to look like. And you have millions and millions of Canadians that 85% that have a plan already in place. What's it going to look like for them? What's it going to look like for those that don't have a plan? All we've done at this point is created false hope. As Doc Ellis has mentioned, you've got Canadians that are constituents that are going into pharmacies now believing that they have a pharmacare plan. We do not have a pharmacare plan. Just like we don't have a dental plan. My point is this, is that, I think if you look at the CPC amendments that have been put forth, they're reasonable amendments. They're nonpartisan for the most part, for a change, I guess, and we've just taken a common sense approach to this. I started off, I raised my hand at the earliest part of Doc Ellis's intervention, because we have three physicians in this committee whom I respect. For what they do or what they did and the sacrifices that they make within our communities, the people that they serve. I've been on this committee now for over a year, and some of the best testimony, I think I've said this, I'm on record as saying this, is we could close the doors and just listen to the experiences that our three colleagues have had, because I believe that we'd probably get more common sense out of them than we do out of the front benches of the government. It's deeply frustrating for me when we It's going to be a long 5 hours is all I got to say. It's if this is the way, I mean, if we, it's already been an hour and a bit. If we're only on one clause, and further to that, Mr. Nakfi, to publicly tell another colleague to go amuse himself or pleasure himself or whatever it was the words that you used in private is not very parliamentary. You can look at me when I'm talking to you, and I think you owe our colleague an apology, because I think that was very unparliamentary. If I was chair, I would have made you apologize. With that, I'll end.
Dr. Ellis?
Thank you very much, Chair. And, interestingly enough, Mr. Julian opened a bit of a Pandora's box. I think there was clearly in the House of Commons a ruling by the Speaker that said the use of the term coalition government was perfectly acceptable, and therefore we shall continue to use that there is an NDP Liberal coalition. And Mr. Julian knows that, because without his support, this bill probably would never have come to the House of Commons. And for trying to make that happen, I will actually take my hat off to Mr. Julian and say, wow, you know what? That's the only one principled thing that the NDP actually attempted to do, whether I agree with it or not. And certainly the other part of this is it's not necessarily related to whether I agree with pharmacare or not. But we also know that this, and I know my colleague from the bloc will enjoy this, that this NDP Liberal coalition continues to want to dabble in the provincial responsibility of healthcare. And I think that is incredibly distressing. And also when we heard from, again, as I mentioned previously, testimony of two of Canada's experts with respect to pharmacare, my apologies, not only were they not consulted, but they also didn't agree with this approach. So that's some of the testimony that we heard. I don't necessarily want to go down the road of dental care, but Chair, you've ruled previously if someone else has brought it up, then we could actually talk about it. Mr. Julian wants to talk about dental care all the time, that he gets a chance. Again, it's not about dental care, it's the frivolous nature which they portray this. When I was doing riding events on the weekend, the Nova Scotia Dental Association, and I suppose Mr. Julian has his conspiracy theory that we in the Conservative asked them to make these ads, but what they said, to paraphrase it, was dental care, the Canada Dental Care Plan is not free. It's not going to be free for Canadians, that they need to, if they can find a dentist who will support it, as my colleague Mr. Doherty talked about, that finding a dentist who would possibly support this is difficult and perhaps non-existent. And sadly, Chair, your province in PEI was for a very, very long time having no dentists who actually signed up for the Canadian Dental Care Plan. So when you begin to look at those statistics, even though the opaque nature of the NDP wishes to portray this as a great success, it's much like the incredible success which this NDP Liberal coalition has allowed our publicly funded healthcare system to become, when 7 million, and for the edification of those around the table and perhaps our two witnesses at the end of the table, that the answer is 7 million Canadians at the current time do not have access to primary care, even though that I agree that's a big number, and it's hard for the minister, who is not having a clue about this particular issue, that he struggles with that large number. I get it. But that being said, that is still the facts, with sadly coming down the road 10 million Canadians without access to primary care. which will be 25% of the population. And maybe that's this NDP Liberal Coalition's idea of saying that's how we cost control healthcare, is that people don't have access, they can't get lab work done, they can't see a specialist, then guess what? Then we can control the costs. I surely hope with all my heart that that is not the nefarious plan behind it, that it is simply incompetence, and that's easily rectified, of course, during the next election. So again, the non-opaque nature with respect to Mr. Julian's comments around dental care are really frustrating to Canadians, because they believe that they can just walk into any dentist's office now and receive free dental care. And everybody around this table knows that's not true. They know it. And why? Because I know that you're getting the same emails that I am. I know that Dr. Pulowski over there in Thunder Bay, Rainy River, is getting the same messages. Now, whether he wants to admit it, and I'm not asking him to admit it, because I rather like him, and that being said, it would be embarrassing for him to have to admit that he's getting calls from people, and I know you, Chair, as well, in your great riding in Prince Edward Island are struggling with that. People are struggling in Charlottetown to get seen. I know that. And I wouldn't suppose to ask you that people are calling your office and saying, where is the dentist who will see me? Now, that doesn't mean that seeing dental hygienists is not great, but if we are underscoring the need for treatment of periodontal disease and dental caries, the potential need for extractions of people who have not had care, which we hear these incredibly emotional stories from our colleagues all the time, those folks need to see a dentist. That's just the way it is. And without that access, then the NDP Liberal Coalition, is selling Canadians a bill of goods, which is just not true. And here we have it once again, another bill of goods called an act respecting pharmacare. And you will hear us call this a pharmacare pamphlet all night, over and over and over again, because it is a 4-page document, which again is not transparent to Canadians, and it is lacking in detail, and again, it is simply directed towards contraception and diabetes at the current time. The other thing that Mr. Julian talked about is cuts, and it's fascinating to me because over and over and over again in the House of Commons, we hear many times where the NDP Liberal Costly Coalition wants to say that all the Conservatives are going to do is cut things. Well, there are a couple of things that we're going to cut, and I think our leader, Pierre Poilievre, mentioned this today, talking about what will we cut? Well, we will cut taxes, which is incredibly important to benefit Canadians, simply because they are suffering under the tremendous tax burden that this costly coalition spending government is creating for Canadians. But the other thing, of course, we're going to cut is Liberal seats and NDP seats. And those things shall be a thing of the past, thankfully, on behalf of Canadians. A couple of other things that definitions that will be important coming up, and other numbers which the minister failed to be able to address. I've already mentioned, and I won't go through it again, the 7 to 10 million Canadians without access to primary care. That's an incredibly large number, and it is embarrassing to the minister. I understand that. He thinks it's politics, and I think it's simply education for Canadians to understand that they are not alone. The other question that we asked during testimony was how many Canadians died waiting for treatment in this country. And the number is between 17 and 30,000 Canadians died in 1 year, waiting for treatment. So my question then would be, why would Canadians want to entrust another large national system to the NDP Liberal Costly Coalition when they can't manage the one large, well now two, so this will be the third actually, so they cannot manage pharmacare, we know that, because people are dying on a waiting list and Canadians don't have access to pharmacare. They can't manage dental care because they can't get dentists to sign up for their terrible program. and we also know that dental care is not free. So why would anybody in their right mind, and this is the responsibility, the mantle that my colleagues and myself bear here on behalf of Canadians, to say, why would Canadians accept allowing the NDP Liberal Costly Coalition to bring forward another nationalized program when they can't manage the two that already exist? And I'm simply restricting my comments to the healthcare field. I certainly don't want to talk about the litany of other programs because I'm sure, Chair, that might be outside the scope of what we want to discuss. But certainly those healthcare programs that they are absolutely unable to manage at the current time, why would we want them to try to manage something else? As my father, who, God rest his soul, has been gone for 30 years, he would say that the NDP Liberal Costly Coalition could not manage a marble game, which appears to be true. So that being said, the other thing that Mr. Julian talked about was testimony that we heard. Testimony. And we all know that for even for this sparsely populated pharmacare pamphlet of 4 pages, that all we got to hear was 10 hours of witness testimony. Now, when we begin to look at that, I can't tell you the numbers of people who came up to me and said, wow, we really wanted to be heard from. And I said, well, you know, they have moved closure. They have said that the Health Committee cannot talk about this any more than 5 hours last Thursday, 5 hours on Friday. And now we are here on behalf of Canadians talking in a clause-by-clause fashion of the pharmacare pamphlet. So the amount of testimony that we heard was a pittance compared to the spending ask on behalf of the NDP Liberal Costly Coalition. And what we did hear very clearly, and I find this absolutely fascinating, because this particular amendment talks about making it clear that this bill is simply about contraception and diabetes medications and or products. And we heard testimony over and over and over again that that's what this was about. Again, as I mentioned previously, you know, the Prime Minister is in my hometown of Truro on Friday, where I was here working hard on behalf of those who support me. And
Mr. Julian, on a point of order?
Well, the other rule, of course, as I mentioned earlier, Mr. Chair, is the repetition, and Dr. Ellis is now repeating himself. And so those are the two. I understand Conservatives want to block this legislation, that don't want Canadians to have the benefits. That's fair enough, but those rules of relevance and repetition do have to be respected in this committee.
Thank you, Mr. Julian. This has been brought up several times, and it appears that it's not going away. I've taken the opportunity during the debate to have a look at the House of Commons practice, page 1059. In the event of disorder, the chair, this is in connection with committee meetings. In the event of disorder, the chair may suspend the meeting until order can be restored, or if the situation is considered to be so serious as to prevent the committee from continuing with its work, the meeting may be adjourned. In addition, the chair may, at his or her discretion, interrupt a member whose observations and questions are repetitive or are unrelated to the matter before the committee. If the member in question persists in making repetitive or off-topic comments, the chair can give the floor to another member. We have always exercised a significant degree of latitude. We are under pretty serious time constraints to get the business done that has been referred to us by the House. After reading that, what I would say to you is that my patience is waning. And I'm not about to take any of those measures yet. but you're making it hard for me not to. So I caution all members to bear in mind what is said in House of Commons procedure and practice, and please don't put me in that position. Let's respect the rules of repetition, let's respect the rules of relevance, and let's respect the tight timeline that we're under. Dr. Ellis.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. You know, interestingly enough, I did have to gavel a meeting when the member from the NDP was being disrespectful. So I thank you for your intervention and that reminder.
Point of order.
The specifics.
Mr. Julian.
That is not correct. I did challenge the chair in a ruling, and that's why he adjourned the meeting.
And that is a point of debate, and maybe you could wait your turn if you want to participate in the debate. Go ahead, Dr. Ellis.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. And certainly, you know, in that particular time, we know that that member was not directing his comments through the chair. I'll leave it at that. You know, that being said, the point about the Prime Minister talking about contraception is the testimony. It's the testimony that we heard. And the testimony that we heard, we didn't, the NDP member talked about heart drugs. We heard no testimony about heart drugs, not one bit. We heard lots of testimony about contraception. There was the, I can't remember her title, a physician from the Society of Obstetricians and Gynecologists of Canada. Certainly she was not here to talk about heart drugs. I didn't hear her talk about that. We had the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. We had the Canadian Diabetes Association here. Nobody talked about heart drugs. And for that member down there of the NDP Liberal Costly Coalition to go on and talk about heart drugs, again, this is about being transparent. It's about saying to Canadians, what is this bill about? This bill is not about heart drugs. This is a little teeny tiny 4-page pamphlet to spend $2 billion on things. Yes, they're important. Contraception's important, and so is diabetes medications and products. Those things are important. There's no doubt about it. However, for that member to go on and talk about the testimony that we heard in this committee, which again, I'll go back just to underscore for 1 second, Chair, that we heard very little testimony, that this is important that Canadians understand, and that is the rationale for this first amendment to say that this is about contraception or the treatment of diabetes and to support, et cetera, et cetera. So that being said, all those things taken into consideration, this is an incredibly important amendment on behalf of Canadians. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Julian.
I would just simply say, Mr. Chair, that the House of Commons gave us a job to do. The Conservatives seem unwilling to do that job. They're blocking even having a vote on CPC 7, even though members have already had the opportunity to pronounce themselves on this. I would suggest through you, Mr. Chair, to members of the Conservative Party, since dental care has worked, including in their ridings, and there are thousands and thousands of Canadians who have now benefited from the dental care program that the NDP pushed the government to put into place in their ridings already after the first 3 weeks, that they should not
Point of order.
Support.
Point of order from Dr. Ellis.
Chair, I believe that you read from Bosch and Gagnon specifically not to be repetitive, and I think this member talked already about the dental care program. So hearing once again those numbers, I would suggest to you, with all due respect, sir, is very repetitive.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis. Go ahead, Mr. Julian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so the pharmacare bill will help many people, millions of Canadians. I would hope that the Conservatives would stop their filibuster and allow us to vote on CPC 7. They've now spent almost 2 hours on one amendment, which is exactly why the House of Commons directed this committee to continue to sit until we've completed the amendments. It's because...
Point of order from Ms. Goodrich.
It has not been anywhere near 2 hours. Furthermore, we
That is not a
started
point of order,
late.
that's a point of debate. Go ahead, Mr. Julian.
So the House of Commons gave us a job to do. Conservatives seem to want to block doing that job. I would ask through you to them Mr. Chair, that they allow the votes to be held, to stop blocking this legislation. It's been before the House since February 29th. Conservatives have blocked it every single step. The reason why 3 months later it is not yet passed through committee is because Conservatives have been blocking it at every single turn. And 6 million Canadians with diabetes, 9 million Canadians who need access to contraception, including basic fundamental
Point of order.
reproductive rights.